when you were 12, your half-sister was murdered by her husband. How did that impact you?
Well, it made me realize how cruel the world could be.
To the betrayal that really ended everything.
For the industry, if they give you a trophy or not, or pat you on the back or not, it's nice, but it's not something that you should dwell on.
At 56, Ice Cube is finally opening up about a truth that no one ever saw coming, the painful loss that forever changed his life. In the heart of South Los Angeles during the early 1980s, a 12-year-old boy named O'Shea Jackson was living what many might call a typical childhood for that time and place. Born on June 15, 1969, to parents Doris, a hospital clerk and custodian, and Hosea Jackson, a machinist and UCLA groundskeeper, young O'Shea, who would later become the world-famous Ice Cube, grew up in the Westmont area of South Los Angeles on Van Wyck Street. His neighborhood, though increasingly burdened by rising gang violence and the crack epidemic that would define the decade, still held small pockets of family warmth and community connection. He had an older brother and, perhaps most importantly, a half-sister named Beverly Jean Brown, 22 years his senior, who lived only a few miles away in south-central Los Angeles. But in 1981, everything changed in a way that would alter Ice Cube's entire destiny, shaping the man, the artist, and the voice of a generation he would later become. The tragedy surrounding Beverly's death was shocking, born from domestic turmoil that spiraled into unspeakable violence. Her husband, Carl Clifford Brown, 27, had once dreamed of becoming an LAPD officer but failed to make the cut, something that, according to Ice Cube, led him into deep frustration and emotional collapse. Cube described Carl as a wannabe cop obsessed with the power that officers held over people, and his unfulfilled ambitions, mixed with anger and insecurity, sent him down a dark path that would destroy lives. On a fateful day in 1981, a domestic argument between Carl and Beverly spiraled out of control. Carl barricaded himself and Beverly inside their home, turning it into a hostage situation that would end in unimaginable tragedy. Police surrounded the house, and after hearing gunshots, SWAT officers stormed in to find Beverly dead and Carl critically wounded. He died a month later. The couple's 1.5-year-old son was left behind, now an orphan, deepening the heartbreak for everyone involved. For 12-year-old Ice Cube, this was not a distant event. It was personal, raw, and life-shattering. This wasn't a headline. It was his sister, his family, his blood. The experience split his world in two, before and after. Before, his neighborhood still had joy, kids laughing and families trying to hold on to normal life. After, that innocence was gone for Ice Cube has often reflected on how that moment changed him, saying it made him realize how cruel the world could be and how life can be stolen by someone you trust. It wasn't only the loss itself that scarred him, it was the brutal, personal nature of it. The fact that someone meant to love and protect Beverly had instead become her killer.
When you were 12, your half-sister was murdered by her husband. How did that impact you?
Well, it made me realize how cruel the world could be. It made me realize that, something as precious as your life can be taken away by somebody.
The emotional and psychological impact of this tragedy cannot be overstated when we examine the course Ice Cube's life would take from that point onward. It awakened within him a deep awareness of life's fragility, transforming him into a far more serious and cautious individual who viewed the world through a sharper, more guarded lens. While most 12-year-olds were still focused on playground games, laughter, and childhood friendships, Ice Cube was being forced to grapple with adult realities, mortality, violence, domestic abuse, and the cruel truth that good people could vanish in an instant without reason or justice. This wasn't merely growing up quickly. It was having his innocence stripped away entirely, replaced with a harsh, unforgiving understanding of the world that most people never experience, even as adults. Yet the ripple effects of Beverly's death extended far beyond his private emotional world. Her loss would influence Ice Cube's actions, decisions, and moral compass throughout his youth, particularly during the turbulent 1980s, when the crack epidemic and gang violence gripped South Central Los Angeles. In one particularly haunting memory that Ice Cube has since shared publicly, a classmate deceived his mother into giving him $20 under false pretenses. On the surface, it might seem insignificant, a small con, a petty betrayal. But for young Ice Cube, still reeling from the trauma of his sister's murder, it became something far greater. The manipulation of his mother's kindness and the sheer disrespect it showed ignited the rage and hurt already simmering within him. Consumed by fury, Cube and his friends armed themselves and set out to find the boy. Ice Cube has admitted with brutal honesty that their intention was clear: they were going to kill him. This wasn't bluster or teenage bravado. They had weapons, anger, and a hardened sense of reality that had taught them how easily a life could be taken. But fate intervened. The classmate wasn't home that day. That single twist of circumstance prevented what would have been a tragedy beyond repair. Looking back, Ice Cube calls it a blessing. "Thank God he wasn't home," he said. "We were young, mad, and had a weapon. It would have happened. It was stupid, and I wouldn't be sitting here if it did." Think about that. One of the most influential figures in hip-hop, a man who shaped the sound and soul of a generation, who became a global cultural force, actor, and producer, could have lost everything over $20. "Nobody should die over $20, he has said. That lesson, reinforced by his sister's death, became one of the cornerstones of his worldview. The sheer senselessness of violence and how unchecked rage can destroy lives forever. From that realization came a lifelong awareness of how fragile the line is between one future and another. On a broader social level, this episode also molded Ice Cube's perspective on gun violence and authority, shaping his later political and artistic outlook. He has openly connected his sister's death to what he calls America's sick love, affair with guns, expressing a somber skepticism about the country's ability to ever escape the cycle of violence. This was not political posturing, it was lived experience. He had seen firsthand how quickly anger could turn to murder when firearms were within reach. Now a father of 5, Ice Cube has taken a balanced stance on gun ownership, advocating responsible, educated use while warning against carrying guns unnecessarily. His position is rooted in both understanding and fear. Understanding of why people in dangerous environments feel compelled to arm themselves, and fear of the irreversible consequences that come with that decision. The cost, he knows, is often measured in lives lost and futures erased. From personal trauma to creative transformation, perhaps the most profound outcome of Beverly's death was how it planted the seeds of Ice Cube's distrust toward authority, particularly police power. The fact that Beverly's husband, Carl Brown, had once aspired to be a cop, and that his failure and frustration ultimately led to murder-suicide, left Ice Cube with what he called a bad taste toward those who crave power for the wrong reason. For Cube, this was not abstract theory. It was his reality, a family tragedy that revealed how power can corrupt and how easily authority can be abused. He has made it clear over the years that while he believes policing is necessary, he also insists that accountability must be absolute. "Just because you are police don't mean you can treat people any way you want to," he said repeatedly. That belief, born of trauma and sharpened by experience, directly fueled the message behind N.W.A.'s groundbreaking track, F the Police. And make no mistake, that song was not just a rap record. It was a cultural explosion. Written primarily by Ice Cube, its raw verses attacked police brutality, racial profiling, and systemic injustice, all issues Cube himself had experienced, especially while bused to a predominantly white school where he was targeted simply for being black. The courage it took to write and release such a song in 1988 cannot be overstated. Initially, the track was nearly shelved out of fear of retaliation, but when it finally appeared on Straight Outta Compton, it became a rallying cry that still resonates nearly 40 years later. The backlash was immediate and intense. The FBI sent a warning letter to N.W.A.'s label. Police departments refused to provide security for their concerts. Boycotts and outrage followed. Yet, Ice Cube and his crew stood firm. They weren't chasing fame, they were channeling truth. Their music gave a voice to communities long ignored, a raw, unapologetic reflection of their lived experiences. And at the heart of Cube's anger, his drive to expose injustice, lay the shadow of Beverly's death and everything it had taught him about authority, violence, and accountability. Professionally, this trauma bled into his artistry during N.W.A.'s gangsta rap era, when Cube's verses fused personal pain with political fire. But this was never exploitation or shock value, it was authenticity. Ice Cube's art became his therapy, his rebellion, his truth. In time, the lessons of loss also guided his evolution beyond gangsta rap into a protector and family man. His career shifted from hard-edged roles to family-focused films like Friday and Are We There Yet? A move that surprised many who thought of him only as the angry young rapper from Compton. But those who truly understood Ice Cube's story knew that this evolution was inevitable. The tragedy that stole his sister had also taught him the sanctity of family. Behind the tough exterior was a man who had seen how quickly life could vanish and who had vowed to protect what he loved. Married to Kimberly Woodruff since 1992 and father to 4 children including O'Shea Jackson Jr., who famously portrayed him in Straight Outta Compton, Cube's life has come full circle from pain to protection, from loss to legacy. Even now, over 40 years later, Ice Cube continues to honor Beverly's memory. In interviews, he reflects on her often not with bitterness, but with gratitude for the lessons she left behind. His reflections are acts of remembrance, not regret. They're proof of resilience, a reminder that while tragedy may have shaped him, it never defined him. And yet Beverly's death was only the first betrayal Cube would endure. Years later, another blow would come this time, not from family, but from friends he called brothers. After Straight Outta Compton's massive success in 1988, selling over 3 million copies and launching gangsta rap into the mainstream, tensions within N.W.A. began to rise. These weren't simple creative disagreements, they were about money, power, and fairness. Ice Cube, who had written a large share of the group's lyrics, including Straight Outta Compton, Gangsta Gangsta, and F.I. the Police, discovered he was being underpaid. To him, this wasn't about greed, but justice. He sensed exploitation, the very dynamic he'd learned to recognize since childhood, where power and manipulation often hid behind friendship or authority. The group's management, led by Jerry Heller and Eazy-E, resisted transparency. When Cube finally had contracts reviewed, he realized the terms heavily favored Eazy and Heller. The betrayal hit deeply, echoing the same pattern he had seen before. Trust turned into manipulation, family turned into opportunists. The parallels were haunting. By late 1989, unable to resolve the issue, Ice Cube made the bold decision to leave N.W.A. It was a move that would ignite one of the most famous feuds in hip-hop history. The remaining members, Eazy-E, Dr. Dre, MC Ren, and DJ Yella, mocked him, in songs like 100 Miles and Runnin', calling him a traitor. But Cube stayed silent, biding his time until his explosive response on No Vaseline, released in 1991. That track, widely hailed as one of the greatest diss songs ever, was Ice Cube's reckoning. He eviscerated his former group and management, calling out greed, betrayal, and hypocrisy in lines that would become legendary. What began with a sister's murder, a lesson in trust, power, and survival, had evolved into a lifelong mission: to stand up for himself, to never be a victim again, and to use his voice as both weapon and shield.